Hey guys, we are going to be looking at factoring. I know we did a little bit of factoring last week, so the difference is this week we are going to have some leading coefficients that are other than 1. Okay, so we'll have some numbers bigger than 1, and we'll also look at some negative values. Now, you saw some of these last week where what we did is we just factored out whatever that leading coefficient was. It's really nice when we can do that. Okay, so when we can factor it out, we can just divide everything by whatever that number is. We're going to do that. But sometimes that doesn't always work. Okay, so the first example that I want to look at with you guys is 8x squared minus 18x minus 5. Okay, so with this equation, let me adjust that so y'all can see it a little bit. Okay, so with this this quadratic expression here, we can see there's a leading coefficient of 8, but unfortunately we can't just factor out the 8 because 18 is not divisible by 8 and 5 is definitely not divisible by 8, so we're not going to be able to do just factoring it out on this one. So there are a lot of different methods, okay? And one of the videos that I posted has the slip and slide method. That's what they call it. We're going to do a similar process, but it looks more like the one that you guys did last year. Okay, so in the videos last week, I kind of talked about the box method. When we have this leading coefficient other than 1, the box method is what we're going to want to go with. Okay, so when you have a leading coefficient other than 1, what we're going to do is we're going to take that leading coefficient and we're going to take that constant term, and we are going to multiply those two together. Okay, so I'm going to do 8 times 5, which is going to give me 40. All right, so now what I'm doing is I'm looking for factors of 40 that are going to combine to give me that negative 18. All right, so I'm going to start making a list of factors of 40. I know there's 1 and 40, 2 and 20, 3 won't work, 4 and 10, and then we also have 5 and 8. Okay, so out of my list of factors of 40, the only pair that's going to combine to give me that negative 18 would be the 2 and the 20. And the only way they're going to combine to make a negative 18 is if the 2 is positive and the 20 is negative, right? Positive 2 and negative 20 makes negative 18. Okay, so this is where the box comes in. I'm going to set up a 2x2 box. I'm going to take that first term, the 8x squared, and put that in the first box. Then I'm going to take the last term, that negative 5, and I'm going to put that in the last box. And the two pieces that we just decided on over here, the positive 2, I'm going to put that in this box with an x behind it. And then the negative 20, I'm going to put that in this box with an x behind it. Okay, so when I am using the box method, what I'm doing is I'm factoring out the greatest common factor for each row and each column. And that'll give me my two binomials. So I'm going to start with just the top row right here. I've got 8x squared and I've got 2x. They both have an x in it, so I know I'm going to be able to factor an x out. And then 8 and 2, well, their greatest common factor is 2. Okay, so out of the top row, I just factored out a 2x. In the bottom row, we're going to do the same thing. But in the bottom row, we've got negative 20x and then negative 5, right? Since they both do not contain an x, we are not going to be able to factor out an x on this one, but we can factor out a negative 5, right? Negative 5 goes into negative 20, and it also goes into itself. Okay, now we're going to do that same thing, but we're going to look at the columns instead of the rows. So for the first column here, both of these boxes have an x, right? So let's go ahead and factor out an x. And then when I look at 8 and negative 20, well, if I have 8 and 20, the greatest common factor that they both share would be 4. Okay? With the next column, these two boxes do not both contain an x. And if I'm looking at 2 and negative 5, the only factor that they have in common is 1. So this 8x squared minus 18x minus 5 really factors into 2x minus 5 times 4x plus 1, right? Because it was a positive 1, so we put a plus 1 there. All right, so this would be the factored form there. Okay, we're going to look at one or two more examples like this. All right, for the next example, we've got 2x squared plus 7x plus 3. Okay, so we cannot factor a 2 out, right? Because 7's not divisible by 2 and 3 is not divisible by 2. So we are going to take the first term and the last term and we'll multiply them together. 2 times 3 is going to give me 6. I'm going to make a list of my factors of 6. I've got 1 and 6. I've got 2 and 3, and that's it. So I'm looking for the pair that's going to combine to give me a positive 7. Well, to get a positive 7, I would have to use the 1 and the 6, and they both have to be positive. Okay, so I'm going to set up the box now. Okay, the first term goes in the first box, 2x squared. The last term goes in the last box, so there's our positive 3. We had a positive 1x and then a positive 6x, right, from our 1 and our 6 over here. Okay, so when we start factoring these out, again, I'm going to do the rows first, and then I'll do the columns second. So for the first row, we can factor out an x, and that's it. On the bottom row, we've got 6x and 3. We can factor out a 3. When I look at the columns, for the first column, we can factor out an x, and we can also factor out a 2. Here, we can factor out just a 1, right? That's the only thing that these have in common, is they're both divisible by 1. Okay, so our 2x squared plus 7x plus 3 really just factors into 2x plus 1 times x plus 3. Okay. All right. Let's look at one more before we jump into a negative coefficient. Okay, so this one I want you to kind of be careful with. I'm going to write out our expression. Can y'all see that? No, you cannot. Okay, so I'm going to write out my expression. I have 2x squared minus 13x plus 20. Okay, so again, we can't just factor out the 2 because of that 13, right? It's not divisible. So we're going to multiply the first term times the last term. 2 times 20 gives us 40. And we made a list of the factors of 40 on that very first problem. Okay, so I'm just going to rewrite that list here. Okay, so if these are our factors of 40, remember we're looking for the pair that's going to combine to give me a negative 13. Well, there's actually only one pair here that's going to combine to give me a negative 13, right? And it's the 5 and the 8. But if I want those to combine to be a negative 13, both the 5 and the 8 have to be negative, right? But that's okay, because if we do a negative 5 times a negative 8, that's still going to give us that positive 40 that we needed. So if we set up the box, okay, I've got my 2x squared, and I've got my positive 20. Now I also have my negative 5x and my negative 8x. Okay. So when we factor out with the rows, in the top row, we can take out an x. In the bottom row, we can take out a negative 4. Okay, and I'm making it negative because it's touching the negative 8 right here. For the columns, we could take out a 2x. And for this column, we can take out a negative 5. And again, I'm making that a negative because it's touching this negative 5. So our factors would be 2x minus 5 times x minus 4. Okay. All right, I hope this has been helpful. We will, if I can find my cursor, in the next video, start looking at factoring when you have a negative coefficient.